Giants fans are right to be afraid of this, where the team makes a trade for a short-term goal and it ends up burning them long-term, like Bryan Reynolds to the Pirates and also Zach Wheeler to the Mets for Carlos Beltran. And so I'm going to make the case, though, that this year, even though the Giants are positioned to win, I don't think that's really something that you need to fear.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts, including YouTube. Check us out there if you have not already, and hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube. We're very close to 5,000 subscribers. And coming up on today's show, another mailbag edition of the show. We have so many questions left over from the last time we asked for a prompt. Really appreciate everyone who submits questions on Twitter. And as usual, these last few times, the question order is selected by ChatGPT-4, which was told to sort the remaining questions in order of what would be most interesting to listeners of the Locked On Giants podcast. So I find that interesting. And the number one question comes from actually three different people, Andre, Hayden, and Ezra, and it's about trades and if this is really the year to go all in. Andre says, amid all the talk about the trade deadline, I find myself worrying about the front office giving up significant talent to fuel a potential mediocre postseason run a la Bryan Reynolds. What's your take on shoring up the 2023 team without compromising the future? Hayden says, should it be a priority to add and compete this year or just ride it out and let the kids experience with the expectations of not intentionally making a run at the series? Ezra says, rumors are that prices are higher at the deadline. Does that still make you think the Giants should buy? The farm is looking good. Is it time to cash in, or are you okay with staying put and waiting? So yes, all three questions kind of the same here. And what I will say is that I will point you back to 2021. I know that they were having a better season in 2021, but still you could make a case that this is a better time than 2021 to make moves, because in 2021, they still didn't have the kind of influx of youth. And so it was a surprise to everyone that they won 107 games, and it didn't necessarily, like, even going into 2022, people didn't really buy that the Giants were going to have a great year, and they didn't. But they went out and got Kris Bryant, and they didn't give up all that much to get him, and he was one of the best players available. So the Bryan Reynolds trade, I will also point out, was made by the previous regime, and it was kind of one that ultimately, I think, kind of sealed their fate in making that move to bring in McCutchen, who was okay, but, Bryan Reynolds became a stud in Pittsburgh. And so that was a trade that was made before the season, and that was definitely ill-advised looking back on it. But there's two things going on. Number one, I think that this front office is probably a little bit better at evaluating talent and evaluating who's someone they should give up and who's someone they shouldn't give up. And number two is that we're talking about like the fact that they were able to get such an impact. Well, Kris Bryant, I think that he's maybe not the impact player that people kind of thought that he was, and that is getting further and further established every day as he struggles to do much in Colorado. But they got a player who was highly coveted without giving up their top prospects. And so I think that this year, you're not going to, unless Shohei Ohtani, that's the one thing. Like, if these questions were just, should the Giants do what it takes to get Ohtani, that's a whole different question, because I think maybe they should, in part, not just maybe, like that's almost too intriguing to pass up, but it would cost a lot. But I think last offseason, last trade deadline, Juan Soto was available. And we, at first, were making the case, yes, you should get this guy. But I always kind of said, and then ultimately concluded, that the Giants shouldn't do what it takes to get Juan Soto. And hear me out. Because they would have to give up so much because he had 2.5 years of team control. The return that the Nationals got from the Padres was like historically good in terms of, it would have been like everyone: Kyle Harrison, Marco Luciano, Luis Matos. I don't know exactly who else, it would have required, but they would have depleted the farm to get one player. And while that one player is great, I made the case to like just go out and buy a player in the offseason because they seemed motivated and there was there were a lot of stars out there and they did try, but you could have brought in a Carlos Correa by just spending money and not depleting the farm. But this is a different situation. There's no Juan Soto out there, and you might say, what about Ohtani? Well, I'm saying it's not the same because Soto has 2.5 years of team control. Soto had 2.5 years of team control at the time of that trade, whereas Ohtani has half a year, and it's really less than half. It's just 2 months, August and September, I guess, and the remaining half of July, and of course a playoff run. But in baseball, playoffs are not, guaranteed. Even if you go out and get an Ohtani, you're just not guaranteed anything in the postseason. Although, man, he can make as much of an impact as anybody, and I bet that he would. He's one of those guys who I just think will thrive under pressure. And so, all of that to say, if Ohtani's available, I think it is worth giving up some talent because not only do you get that impact for the rest of the season and a playoff run, and it's the most impact of anybody in baseball right now, but you also have maybe it legitimately increases your chances of re-signing the guy if you have success together and he experiences your organization and likes it. But I do doubt that the Angels will trade him. And so outside of that, there aren't these kind of top tier players to trade. And also, one more thing is that, I think of like a guy like Tommy Edman on the Cardinals, who I really like and I think is a good fit for the Giants. And his price would be kind of high because he does have 2.5 years of team control, but he's not a star like Juan Soto. So it might cost something significant, but it might be worth it because it's not just a 2023 piece, but it's a future piece. Because I've said, look at the shortstop position starting next year. Brandon Crawford's a free agent. Who's the shortstop for next year? And then it's like, oh, turn to free agency. There aren't a lot of or any shortstops that really appeal to me as someone the Giants should sign there. And so trading for a player who could help you this year, but also potentially give you coverage at that shortstop position in next year and even the year after that might be something the Giants should look into. And it might be worth giving up something pretty valuable because it helps you now and in the future. So that's I hope that I answered your questions. And I think this front office is trustworthy in that they'll handle it well. So coming up in just a minute, we are going to get to the question, why do the Giants struggle against inferior teams and specifically random no-name pitchers having their best outings ever against the Giants? Why does that happen? What's going on? We'll get into all of that in just a minute. And before we do, this episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Sleeper is just an awesome app that I've recently discovered where you can have the chance to win more money with less picks. Head to Sleeper where you can win up to 100 times your money on just 2 or more fantasy baseball picks. And it's really great. So you can look at all the featured games and all these featured players and all these different categories, hits, home runs, steals, combinations of all those, and you simply pick over or under. And I think that, listening to this show and learning about platoon matchups and all that kind of stuff, it really gives you a leg up in this game. And yeah, like looking at Giants games on any given day when we talk about the matchups and all that, you're going to have an edge. And so go to sleeper.com and use promo code LOCKEDON and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. All right, as promised, more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow on the show, we're going to be analyzing the Giants' pitching staff through the first half of the season. High highs with Logan Webb and Alex Cobb and Camilo Duvall, but also low lows with Ross Stripling and Sean Manaea, like not even pitching out of the rotation really this year, despite the expectation that they would. And so it's an interesting conversation to address the Giants pitching, which is very unorthodox with all the bulk innings guys as opposed to like traditional starters. And that wasn't really the plan coming into the year. So that conversation tomorrow. Next question comes from Jen, who asks or says, yes, fluke results happen often in baseball, but the Giants seem to regularly lose to inferior teams and especially to no-name struggling pitchers. Is this due to their hitting approach? It seems to me this trend started after the loss of their hitting coach, Donnie Ecker. And so, Jen, I think the same thing sometimes, to be honest. Like, I still think about Donnie Ecker frequently and how, I mean, it's kind of a small sample of Donnie Ecker. We had 2021 and the magical regular season, and the Giants really hit. If you look at their offensive numbers, you have to remember that that was the last year pitchers were in the lineup. And so I, look at non-pitcher numbers, and they were much better than they have been this year even, and in 2022, certainly. And even in 2020, it was a small sample, but they hit better than they hit in 2022 and 2023 once Donnie Ecker was gone. And so while I do think they definitely lost something with the loss of Donnie Ecker, I also have to remind myself of they've had a lot of success stories with their hitters. And, you look at Patrick Bailey's kind of breakout, and you look at Thairo Estrada improving. J.D. Davis really kind of improved in a lot of ways, not only defensively, but also at the plate. If you look at lately, he's been swinging and missing a lot at pitches in the strike zone, just by way of example. And I look back, and when he was with the Mets, he basically always had the same kind of swing and miss that he has right now in this last couple week period when he's been swinging and missing a lot. In fact, even worse than that. And so they've really helped J.D. Davis improve. And there are all kinds of success stories. LaMonte Wade Jr. In 2021 had the great year, and then in 2022 fell off. And it was easy to point to that and say, just as another example, potentially, of the impact of Donnie Ecker and the impact of losing him. But then this year he's completely rebounded, hitting 275, 404 on base, 434 slugging. Yaz is back and having a good year, getting a good year out of Blake Sable. Slater's made an impact. And, last year Jock Peterson was sensational offensively. I look at a guy like Brandon Crawford, who had an MVP type season in 2021, but has just completely fallen back to earth in 22 and 23. So that's another example of making it look like you've lost something with the loss of Donnie Ecker. So it's really kind of confusing to me. And why do they struggle? I don't know. One of the things I always want to mention is, and they pointed out on the broadcast, but it is real, is the early innings at Oracle Park and the glare on the hitter's eye in center field. The background that the hitters are seeing is bright, and the ball coming in is white. And so that you really want a dark background to be able to see the baseball coming in. And so I think that largely explains the Giants' struggles early in games when they've been at home. The thing is, they've kind of carried that on the road as well, but they've also been streaky. There were times when they were just cruising offensively. And so while I do think that they lost something with the loss of Donnie Ecker, they also still seem to me to be like an above average team at getting the most out of the hitters that they have. And in fact, not just above average, but one of the best. And they're streaky. So I think they could just go off and have great offensive performances against random pitchers. They also they don't always lose to inferior teams. They've taken care of the Rockies. I think they've lost one time to the Rockies this year. But you beat good teams? That doesn't really make sense. I think that's kind of just more random than anything else. But it does seem to happen. I don't know why. I don't have an explanation. I don't think they're not prepared. I just think that's baseball, but it's weird. It does seem to happen to the Giants more than it sometimes happens to other teams, and it certainly didn't happen in 2021, but I think 2021 was kind of a fluke year, and I don't think that if Donnie Ecker was still here, you'd be 107 wins every year. They would have their struggles as well with him, but you do look at the Texas Rangers, who are having a phenomenal offensive year. That's where Donnie Ecker went, but last year they didn't. They were okay, but they weren't as good as they have been this year. And, they didn't make major offensive acquisitions in the offseason. So anyway, it's weird, but I guess I don't totally know the answer to the question, but it's worth talking about. Next question from Hall of Fame Posey, who says, what do you think the Giants lineup will look like come playoff time? And so the good news is, hopefully, guys are healthy, but you never know what's going to happen between now and then. But I think, LaMonte Wade Jr., a staple at the top, certainly against right-handed pitching. I see Jock Peterson at the top, DHing, J.D. Davis at third base. There's a lot of stability with some of these guys, and a lot of them have become everyday guys and not just platoon guys like J.D. Davis. And Thairo Estrada also in that mix. He's fallen off offensively after a really great start, and so I don't know if you're asking about the specific order of the lineup. It depends on if they're facing a righty or a lefty. Obviously, the lineups always look different for the Giants depending on that. Michael Conforto in there in right field. Mike Yastrzemski in there. That's where it gets complicated, is in the outfield, because Luis Matos is in the mix right now, certainly. But if and when Mitch Haniger comes back, there's your outfield. Mitch Haniger in left, Mike Yastrzemski in center, and Michael Conforto in right. And so I think that it kind of does push out Luis Matos. He's got another month and a half to kind of show what he can do and potentially prove that he belongs in that starting lineup. And then if he does, then I don't know exactly what they do. So maybe these next 2 weeks are important, because maybe, I don't know, I don't think they're going to trade a Michael Conforto or something. Certainly not a Mike Yastrzemski. Conforto has had a somewhat disappointing first half, but I still believe he can break through, and he's got that player option for next year, which right now it looks like he would opt in, but a really strong second half could change that. Patrick Bailey, obviously, I think he could be in the middle of the lineup come playoff time. He's certainly established himself as a guy who's in that lineup pretty much every day, as much as a catcher can be. And at shortstop, Brandon Crawford, but I could see, like I said earlier, the Giants making a move to, for the present and the future at the shortstop position. And then, Austin Slater, Wilmer Flores, those guys kind of in there on the bench, I should say. And yeah, I think that maybe you see one significant offensive player added. I really do like Tommy Edman, but we'll see. He's currently on the injured list, and the 2.5 years of team control makes it not necessarily likely at all that the Cardinals will trade him, despite them having a difficult season in St. Louis. So, yeah, coming up in just a minute, another question. We're going to talk about run differential. Why am I always talking about run differential, and also the ballpark? If it's such a pitcher's park, why don't the Giants aggressively pursue top flight pitchers when they've had so much trouble attracting hitters? So we will get into it in just a minute. And before we do, this episode is brought to you by my favorite shorts of all time, Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs give you a sculpted look. I got my pair of Bird Dogs. I put them on before even looking in the mirror, walked out to the living room. My girlfriend, she looks, one look is all it took. And she said, those are the best looking shorts you've ever had. Because she knew I was trying them on. And I was shocked. I mean, because we've been together a while and I've worn quite a few pairs of shorts. And so there was that. And not only that, but they were so comfortable because, I care a lot about comfort. And that was one of the first things I noticed when I put them on. And so to get that comfort and to get that positive confirmation that they were good looking, it was just a game changer because I instantly knew I could wear these shorts around the house and be comfortable. I could wear them to the office. I could wear them to the golf course, wherever, to a job interview. That is what Bird Dogs provides. And you can go to birddogs.com/lockedon or enter promo code LockedOnMLB, birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or promo LockedOnMLB for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. All right, as promised, a few more questions and answers as selected by our robot overlord, ChatGPT-4. Thank you so much, ChatGPT-4, and the people who asked the questions. I really appreciate it. Coming up tomorrow, thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers tomorrow. We're going to be discussing the Giants pitching in the first half. We talked about the position players yesterday, so check that out if you didn't already. And the next question comes from Benny, who says, for years we've heard that it's hard to attract free agent hitters because Oracle is a pitcher's park. Why don't we aggressively pursue top flight pitchers? If Oracle is a pitcher's park, wouldn't they want to pitch here? Instead, we settle for the mid-range, Wood, DeSclafani, etc. So it's a fair question. And you probably haven't heard me talk about it. I feel like I've talked about this a lot, but I don't know. On the one hand, you look at, Kevin Gausman as an example. Like, why didn't they re-sign Kevin Gausman? Well, I would counter that by saying they targeted him in the first place before he was what he became. And so I wouldn't say they necessarily settle for mid-range. I think they really believe in the potential of the guys that they sign. It hasn't always worked out. I think that that's what we've seen as time has gone on, is that, and Alex Wood, I think that, with Wood and DeSclafani, you're not looking at huge ceiling, but I don't think you can always get huge ceiling with every pitcher that you sign. And so with Gausman, it turned out there was huge ceiling there. And I would counter that and say Cobb kind of signed a mid-range type of contract, but has been better, significantly better than mid-range. Like he's like a legitimate number 2 starter right now, despite being 35, despite not being that kind of pitcher in the past. And so, and also development, like Logan Webb, they kind of turned into a frontline starter. And so they've had a lot of success with their starting pitching moves and development and all that. But, they also didn't re-sign Kevin Gausman. Also, Carlos Rodon, they signed him initially. And so I don't think they just settle for mid-range. They, with Carlos Rodon, they preferred to get him when he was available on a short-term deal. And then as soon as he had a great season and the market was going to bear out a long-term deal, they didn't re-sign him. And so it's clear to me, why don't we do this? Because they don't really want to sign pitchers to long-term deals. And why don't they want to do that? Probably because of the risk associated with long-term deals for pitchers, and that so many of them don't work out because, you'd have to ask them exactly why, but the pitchers just kind of fall apart quickly, and they have more injuries. And when they have injuries, they're serious injuries and long-term injuries. And I think that it's just too much risk with some of these guys. And we saw it with Carlos Rodon. He just made his season debut for the Yankees in July. I think it was early July. And so he missed many months. He has a chronic back issue already. And so, but with Gausman, you see the reverse of that, which is he's been dominant for 2 years since leaving the Giants. So it's just risk. I think that they view, I don't know because they never confirm, but I believe that it's the risk associated with long-term deals for pitchers. Now with Logan Webb, they gave him this extension, which is 5 years after this year, and that's a long-term deal for a pitcher, but he's also younger than when a pitcher typically will get a long-term deal to start. Like Kevin Gausman and Carlos Rodon, they were already 30 or at least close to it. I think they were both past 30 when they got these deals. Webb is 26, and so I think that the timeline is also something to consider. What years are you signing these pitchers? What ages are they in these deals? And so, I don't know. Shohei Ohtani is part pitcher, right? And so we'll see. Like if they really go out and try to get this guy, then I don't think it's necessarily a hard rule, but that's the explanation I can give. And then also, like I said, the mid-range guys, I don't think they're really settling for mid-range. I think that mid-range is part of their wheelhouse, but a lot of those guys have upside, and we've seen it. We've seen it with Gausman and Rodon and Cobb and others. But yeah, Wood and DeSclafani are good examples of ones that haven't worked out great, but also they were short-term. And so Wood is a free agent at the end of the year, and DeSclafani only has one more year. And so that kind of proves their theory that the short-term deals are better because if they don't work out, they can move on quickly. Last question comes from Lyle, who says, Ben, you often refer to a large positive run differential as an indicator that a struggling team will improve and vice versa for a team doing well with a negative run differential. Do you have data from past seasons to bear this theory out? And that data does exist. I don't have it on hand, but yes, I'm not just saying that because I believe it. There's a reason that if you go to MLB.com and it'll show you run differential and it'll show you expected win-loss record, because it has been studied and shown that run differential is at a certain point more predictive than your actual record at your future performance. And so it doesn't always happen, of course, but it's certainly an indicator of a team that's overperforming or underperforming and good at making predictions. Like when we see all these teams in the National League, the Marlins, I think they've kind of improved in that area, but plenty of teams in the National League kind of really outperforming their run differentials. Like I'm pulling up the standings right now. The Marlins, they have a negative run differential and they are 53-39. The Phillies have just a +9 run differential, and they're overperforming their record. And then the Reds and the Brewers, the two top teams in the NL Central, both have a negative run differential. And so I do expect that as the season goes on, and by the way, the Padres have a better run differential than the Giants. And so that kind of indicates to me they're in line for a second half surge. And so that's kind of one team to look out for. And the Cubs also have a positive run differential. So, yeah, there's data to bear it out that those performances are meaningful and that predicting into the second half, it's worth keeping an eye on if those teams kind of regress to where their run differential suggests they should be. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen. Every day, everydayers, tomorrow, pitching. And then the second half, finally, baseball is back tomorrow, and so we'll discuss the Giants pitching to get you set for the second half. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. I cannot wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.